or 12:47:58 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I'm John Innsbrucker, the Falcon Principal Integration Engineer, and I'm broadcasting from the mezzanine at lunchtime here at SpaceX headquarters overlooking our Launch Support Center. And I'll be providing you updates throughout today's launch and flight, which will be lasting just over 1 hour. Now, today's mission will be different from most of our flights. We're deploying satellites into 2 different orbits. So once we get into the first orbit, stay with us as the GRACE satellites will be deployed just over 11 minutes after launch, followed by the Iridium-6 satellites 55 minutes later. Today's launch is from Space Launch Complex 4 at Vandenberg Air Force Base, a nice view you can see right there on the webcast. We have the 2-stage Falcon 9 vehicle standing 70 meters tall on the launch pad. Now, to put it in comparison, that's longer than the wingspan of an Airbus 380 or a Boeing 747. The first stage provides the initial force to get us out of the majority of the Earth's atmosphere. The first stage on this flight is easy to spot. It still bears the reentry soot from the re-entry on its previous flight. Now, this is the second flight of this booster, having first flown just over 4 months ago out of Cape Canaveral. Unlike our newer Block 5 boosters, this first stage is not planned for additional flights, so SpaceX will not recover it today. We will be following the second stage as it takes the satellite from the edge of space and accelerates it to orbital speeds of just over 7.5 kilometers per second. Now, as a reference, that takes us faster than 10 times a speeding bullet. Now, we're going to follow the second stage into orbit, and partway through, while we're just after stage separation, you'll see the payload fairing separate. You can see the fairing on top of the Falcon 9 right now. That's a 17-foot diameter object, inside of which are the 5 Iridium-6 satellites and the 2 GRACE follow-on satellites. Now, for this mission, we will attempt to recover the payload fairing as part of our ongoing fairing reuse initiative. There's a view, a shot from the Falcon 9 payload fairing retrieval ship called Mr. Steven, currently on station in the Pacific Ocean. Now, the ultimate goal of recovering the entire vehicle is part of our overall plan for Falcon, as well as the follow-on rocket that takes us to Mars and interplanetary. So fairing recovery is an important step towards that goal. Meanwhile, back on the launch pad, next to the rocket, you can see the transporter rector, the large white frame structure that contains plumbing, air conditioning, and electrical systems that feed both the rocket and the satellites. And one reminder, unlike the East Coast launches, the transporter rector will begin moving away at T-minus 4.5 minutes to its final launch position, 77.5 degrees up from vertical. T-minus 11 minutes and counting. And as we like to say in the webcast, the Falcon 9 team is working no issues. On the Falcon 9, we began loading propellants at T-minus 70 minutes. Currently, fuel, RP1 kerosene as it's known, is completely loaded on the second stage. Fueling is continuing on the first stage. That will finish loading about 7 minutes before launch. Liquid oxygen loading is ongoing on both the first and second stages and will wrap up in just the last minutes of the countdown. Now, our next major activity coming up in about 3.5 minutes is opening the pre-valves between the first stage propellant tanks and the 9 Merlin 1D engines. This allows the cold liquid oxygen to flow to the top of the turbopumps, begin chilling them in prior to ignition at T-minus 3 seconds. Now, on top of the Falcon 9, the Iridium and GRACE satellite teams, they're both reporting no issues. They have transferred internal power and checked that square at T-minus 15 minutes. The range, Vandenberg Air Force Base, the Western Range, they report they are good and ready to support launch. They're also providing weather support, and as you can see, the fog has lifted. We've got a great view of Falcon 9 with blue skies and currently a 0% probability of violating weather conditions. So at T-minus 9 minutes, 40 seconds and counting, all systems are go. In order to correctly position the satellites, the SpaceX team has to launch right on time. Today's launch window is only 1 second long. So if we delay for any reason, that dreaded hold in the countdown, we do have a backup opportunity tomorrow if conditions permit. Now we'll have a camera view on the second stage. The camera will show the 5 Iridium satellites that are on the bottom of their cylindrical dispenser. That's the area closest to the second stage. On top of that are the 2 GRACE satellites that are mounted side by side on their custom dispenser. They're harder to see. In fact, the camera can't see past the 5 Iridium-6 satellites, so we won't see them until hopefully after separation on orbit. Now the 2 GRACE satellites will be simultaneously deployed shortly after we get into orbit. That's about 11.5 minutes after liftoff. We're then going to have a long coast phase as traditional for Iridium, followed by relighting the second stage engine to change the orbit to that required by the Iridium customer. Now once we get into this new orbit, the 5 Iridium-6 satellites will be deployed. That starts about 66 minutes after liftoff. We're going to release the satellites one at a time every 100 seconds. Now as many of you remember, we've been launching Iridium satellites since the beginning of 2017. We're going to have 2 more launches after today's to finish the Iridium constellation. Now when completed, that network will have a total of 66 active satellites as well as 9 in-orbit spares. Now you may wonder, with this large constellation of cross-linked satellites going around in low Earth orbit, what does that allow people to do? Well, one of the key capabilities of the Iridium-6 system is supporting emergency situations. So let's take a look at how Iridium-6 provides connectivity for emergency services and first responders around the world.
We take our safety for granted. We expect that we can make a call, be located, and be in touch when needed.
And we don't think much about our safety beyond that, until we need help.
Then we reach for our phone, we call the police, the fire department, whoever it is, we call the number. We expect to make that connection. We have faith that that call will always go through.
What if it doesn't?
What if the water is rising, the fire is getting closer, or there is a medical emergency in a remote area? You don't want to be faced with this. What if a natural disaster has destroyed phone lines and cell towers? What then? First responders need reliable, quick access to be able to coordinate relief efforts across teams in desperate situations. In today's world, as the weather can change in a moment's notice, and emergencies can mean life or death, threats to our safety are unpredictable. A reliable connection shouldn't be. Iridium's constellation of 66 satellites constantly orbiting the Earth means no matter where we are, anywhere, for any reason, we could have a lifeline to safety. It makes sense the new broadband service is called Iridium Certus. The name means certain and reliable. Iridium's global connectivity provides people in the air, at sea, or remote location, as well as the people committed to keeping us safe, with the peace of mind of being connected. When it comes to our safety, connectivity should never be in doubt, not have limits, and never be compromised. That's why Iridium makes the world a safer place.
That gave you a better sense of the connectivity the Iridium-6 constellation will provide. As I mentioned, we also have 2 additional satellites on board mounted above the Iridium-6 satellites. These are the GRACE follow-on satellites. They're called follow-on because they replace 2 satellites also called GRACE that were launched back in 2002. Now the two GRACE satellites fly in orbit about 220 kilometers apart. The satellites use microwave radio frequency signals to measure the distance between them. The measurement is accurate to about the thickness of a blood cell. It's incredibly accurate. Now before I talked about their name, it's the mission of Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment. The Earth's gravity will tug on each satellite at different times as they fly over mountains and seas. The accurate measurement and location that we have of the satellites allows the Earth's gravity to be measured and mapped. And knowing what causes the gravity to change slightly going around the Earth is used to understand how water is moving around the world, influencing the climate. Now we've just passed inside of T-minus 4 minutes. The transporter erector Strongback is moving away from the Falcon 9. We're also finishing up loading liquid oxygen on the second and first stage. First stage should finish about 3 minutes, second stage shortly after that. Stage T TVC motion nominal just called out. That's the final check of the thrust vector control actuators that move the second stage engine in flight. As we get inside of 90 seconds, you may see a large white cloud come off of that transport erector. We're venting down gaseous oxygen from the plumbing that's in the erector, so that cloud, if we do see one, that's normal. Iridium and GRACE satellites are ready to go. The teams are waiting for launch. The range is ready to support, and the weather has cooperated. As a reminder, we do have a backup launch window tomorrow if anyone calls hold. That'll be about 5 minutes earlier than today. But right now, we've just passed inside of T-minus 3 minutes and counting. Everything looking good for the flight of Falcon 9.
And stage 1 locks close out.
Strongback lower has closed out.
Rock, RC, countdown 1.
Rock.
Verify range is green and go for launch.
Range is green.
Stage 2 locks load close out. Vehicle gas closeout started.
Ground gas closeout started.
AFTS is ready for launch.
F9 is in startup.
LD, go for launch. T-minus 30.
Flight tanks configured for flight.
15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Vehicle switching downrange. Stage 1 props nominal.
GC copies, we'll go.
Plus 47 seconds into flight. Falcon 9 performing nominally. We're currently throttling down the 9 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage, preparing for the period of maximum dynamic pressure and going supersonic.
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
You heard the call out, Falcon 9 is supersonic. We're throttling the Merlin 1D engines back up as we pass through the period of maximum dynamic pressure.
Maximum dynamic pressure.
A minute and a half into flight, trajectory looks good for Falcon 9. We're seeing the view from a ground camera, and obviously we're having trouble with the autofocus, but Falcon 9 continues to track downrange well. Power on the Merlin 1D engines looks good. Avionics power looks good.
MVAC engine chill has begun.
The MVAC engine chill call out indicates that we have opened the pre-valve. We're beginning to chill in the upper stage engine in preparation for ignition. Now the sequence of events coming up at T plus 245, we will have main engine cutoff. We'll shut down the 9 Merlin engines. The first stage will then separate, and we will light the second stage engine. So those activities coming up in just under 20 seconds from now. Throttling down the engines in preparation for MECO. Preparation, second stage engine is lit. Major activity coming up in about 14 seconds is separation of the payload fairing. We have fairing separation confirmed. You can see 3 of the Iridium-6 satellites of the set of 5. As I mentioned, the GRACE satellite's mounted on top of that, but not visible from the camera.
Is following a nominal trajectory.
3.5 minutes into flight, we've heard the call out. The trajectory is nominal. The power on the upper stage engine is good. T plus 4 minutes since that great liftoff from Vandenberg. A view from the second stage aft-facing camera. California coastline, we're headed south towards Antarctica. Now, as a reminder, the first stage is not going to be recovered, so there won't be any views from the drone ship downrange on this mission. We're 5 minutes into flight. Second stage engine power on the MVAC-D engine continues to look good. We're running at over 200,000 pounds of thrust in the vacuum of space. Trajectory continues to look good. Power on the second stage from the batteries mounted on the avionics rack continue to perform well. All systems continue to look good on the Falcon 9, carrying 5 Iridium-6 satellites and the 2 GRACE follow-on satellites. T+ 6 minutes and 4 seconds into flight. Second stage of the Falcon 9 continues to perform nominally. All systems go on Falcon 9 carrying Iridium-6 and GRACE follow-on. Listening to call-outs from the propulsion team, everything continues to look good for the upper stage engine. Now, as a reminder, it's 6 minutes and 45 seconds into flight. This is the first burn. That'll put us into an initial orbit, following which we will deploy the GRACE satellites. We'll then have a second burn that moves us into final orbit for the deployment of the Iridium-6 satellites. So stay with us after we get shut down of the engine. 7 minutes into flight. As I mentioned, we'll have 2 burns. In between will be a 42-minute coast phase between the end of burn 1 and the start of burn 2. Coming up on 8 minutes into flight since launch of Falcon 9 from Space Launch Complex 4 at Vandenberg Air Force Base. We're heading south over the Pacific Ocean, headed towards Antarctica on our first of 2 burns of the upper stage engine. Now, in order to fly an efficient trajectory for both of the payloads, we're actually now running the second stage engine at lower power. That means the burn will be longer. For folks who are used to seeing us shut down the upper stage engine 9 to 9.5 minutes into flight, today we'll actually be shutting down the engine just past T+10 minutes into flight. That's planned for today. The longer burn at lower power obviously takes more time, but gives us a more efficient trajectory.
Stage 2 AFTSS saved.
We're just past 9 minutes into flight. Everything continues to go well. As I said before, we're headed for Antarctica right now. We will have a coast phase once we get shut down. It'll cross over the southern polar regions and then en route east of Africa, where we will relight the engine. You might have heard a call out behind me. I think some of the employees got a glimpse of one of the other cameras, and that's nominal on the second stage, so no need to worry about the expressions that you might have heard in the background.
Vehicles and terminal guidance.
We're coming up less than 30 seconds to shutdown of the second stage engine.
Cook, LOS expected.
TICO.
We've had shutdown of the second stage engine. We're going to wait for call out on the orbit.
Nominal parking orbit insertion.
And what we like to hear on the speakers in the background, nominal parking orbit insertion. The first burn of the second stage is complete, but stay with us because in less than a minute, we're going to be coming up on separation and deployment of the 2 GRACE follow-on satellites. While we can't see the satellites directly from the camera, we're hoping with the wider field of view of the camera that we might catch a glimpse of one or two of them passing through the field of view as they separate away from the dispenser mounted on top of the 5 Iridium-6 satellites.
GRACE payload deploy confirmed.
We have confirmation of deployment of the GRACE follow-on satellites. So we're through the first major milestone today. The first satellites have been deployed. We're now going into a coast phase with the second stage with the 5 Iridium-6 satellites still attached. We're going to resume coverage of live commentary at T plus 56 minutes, just under 44 minutes from now. We'll leave you with animations and possibly live views from space as we have ground station contact. So currently, everything looking good on Falcon 9, and we'll be back coming up for the relight of the second stage engine and the deploy of the Iridium-6 satellites.
Vandenberg LOS expected.